It's time for Dialogue Conspiracy with political research specialist Mae Brussell, who for 3 years has shared with us her decades' research into political assassinations and abuses of power in this country. Her program relates the news of the week to emerging evidence about the conspiracy which allegedly maintains by force its control over the legislative and judicial processes in America. And now, here's Mae.
Good afternoon. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California, Dialogue Conspiracy, January the 6th, and this is number 178. If you take tape cassettes or recordings of the program, this is the 178th program of Dialogue Conspiracy from Carmel. I have a few announcements to make on the program before I get started with the bulk of the program. I always forget to make them for weeks at a time, and so I decided to do them at the beginning of the show. I will be teaching a course again with Ray Fabrizio at Monterey Peninsula College. We taught one last spring on conspiracies and assassinations, and this year it will be focused upon the John Kennedy assassination and the Robert Kennedy assassination. It seems that the faculty or the powers that be wanted a more specific subject. It's a little safer, and it's a good subject to limit the discussions. They won't be limited to that. But if we go into the John Kennedy assassination, the Robert Kennedy, then you can apply that information to many other conspiracies that have taken place since then. And the formula is a surefire one, and you can do your own research from that point or look back and restudy some of the news accounts and books of the various assassinations that we do talk about on Dialogue Conspiracy during the year. The course is not in the bulletins. Again, like last year, it was gotten together late and may not be posted in the halls, and people are signing up to register. So it's Humanities, I believe it's Wednesday afternoon, Humanities 195. You can check that out in the Humanities Department, the correct number. Lecture Form 102, and by word of mouth you can spread the word that the course on the Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy assassination will begin this spring semester. If you have any questions that you want answered on the air about political assassinations, write to me at KLRB, Carmel, California, and the box 3904 at Carmel 93921. I'm getting letters at home and at the station on certain questions or problems that I cannot answer personally in letters, but they're general cross-section of different aspects of conspiracies, and if you want them answered on the air, and if I've not done it in a recent time period, I'll be glad to answer them for you, so you can write to me at the station. If you want a bibliography of reading that covers a wide range of subjects of the Robert Kennedy assassination, John Kennedy, the CIA, the Charlie Manson case, the Ted Kennedy accident at Chappaquiddick, I have a list of 30 books, suggested reading that covers a wide range of prison problems in the United States related to conspiracies in general. Send me a self-addressed envelope, and I'll send you a bibliography of a good cross-section of books to read on this subject. And the Realist, if you haven't read the 3 articles that I did for the Realist, you can send $2.50 for a set of 3. An article I wrote in 1972, one in 1973, another 74, and you can write again to Carmel, Box KLRB, Box 3904, and I will send you those articles. If you do not get the Realist in your hometown, such as stations in Dayton, Ohio, or in Boston, or Oregon, wherever Dialogue Conspiracy is played, you may not be getting them at college bookstores or locations, and once you get a set of them, with a list of suggestions of what to do with this information, then you can ask your local bookstore to stock them in bulk and begin to spread the information around wherever you are and you're listening. And I did announce several weeks ago that we were starting to send tapes to Sweden. That's the first international station, and the last few weeks have gone over to Sweden, and hopefully information from Dialogue Conspiracy will be spread around other countries. Playgirl had called me this last week. I did a column for them with Stephanie Caruana, one on the barrel of Howard Hughes. It was the December issue. And they asked me to send in a monthly column. I sent in the mail the first monthly column that will come out in April, the April Playgirl, which will be on the stands in March. And hopefully the column will be called Dialogue Conspiracy, and it'll be one full page a month with a resume of the news of the month and a compilation of some ideas and questions that I get about conspiracies in my research into the various assassinations. The first article that I did for them that will be on the stands in March is the subject, why is it important now to study the John Kennedy assassination? I just completed that article. So KLRB was the first station to carry a tape radio show. It's a live show, but it gets taped to other stations, called Dialogue Conspiracy for 3.5 years. And I believe our college-accredited course at MPC was the first college-accredited course on assassination and conspiracies. And now Playgirl is going to carry a monthly page on conspiracies, and hopefully that will be as successful as our radio programs have been. And then there's always the question, what do you do with this information that I pour out each week? I used to have a format of suggesting books to read. In the last few months I've gotten kind of lax on that because I did have the bibliography made up if you want it. And what else do you do with this information? There are congressmen like Don Edwards and Henry Gonzalez that are accumulating evidence of the conspiracy of the John Kennedy assassination, and you can write to them because when the new Congress meets, the 94th Congress, they're just getting together now, there will be suggestions made to open up the John Kennedy assassination. You can write to members of the California Assembly on subjects that I bring up that are pertinent to national or California affairs. You can call radio talk shows and submit information, things that you've read from the articles, add to the information that's on the air. KGO in San Francisco last night had a 2-hour show on political assassination of John Kennedy. And this is 11 years after the assassination of Kennedy, but I listened to the audience, the response of people calling in, and to the gentleman on the air. One was Penn Jones Jr. from Texas. They called him, and Reverend Broshears, who was a roommate of David Ferry, the CIA agent that worked in New Orleans, who talked about the CIA involvement in the killing of Kennedy, and Rusty Rhodes were on last night. And these are very valuable programs. The information has been available to researchers for a long time, but there seems to be a willingness of the, what I call the establishment AM radio stations, to air this evidence now, to present it to a new audience or an old one that never got a chance to hear enough of it. So this is the kind of thing that's going over the AM radio stations around the country that I'm talking to and working with. And San Francisco had one last night, and it is happening. People are turning on to this information. They want more. So if you're knowledgeable and learn facts or new information on Dialogue Conspiracy or in the articles I've written or something that you've written, don't just sit back with it and talk about it to a few friends. Write letters to the editors, call the talk shows, call the radio station when it's over, tell them you appreciate it, sharing this information, and write to various officials in Washington and in Sacramento. I say this because each individual has to mobilize himself into the fact that a lot of evidence is coming out that would serve many people if they used it properly, and if you don't use it properly, you would be the loser. And I have here a copy of the article from Sunday's paper, this yesterday, January the 5th. It's a resume of G. Gordon Liddy, surfacing for the first time January the 5th, Sunday night. He was on the Mike Wallace show. Some of you saw it, some of you didn't see it, the program 60 Minutes. Liddy has kept very quiet about his role in the Watergate, but he surfaces only in the role that he did also in the October Harper's Magazine as a hero. He wants to be a hero of a war. And what G. Gordon Liddy says is important, and I want to share it with you in case you didn't hear the program or see the resume. G. Gordon Liddy refers to himself as a soldier, and his wife was on television too. She described her husband as a hero. She said he was serving his country as military men have, and she thought of him and the lives they lived as similar to the POW or the MIAs. Now, in the White House tapes, it just recently revealed the Nixon tapes that were exposed. There was a discussion of Dorothy Hunt, E. Howard Hunt's wife, who's been a CIA officer many years. She was above E. Howard Hunt in the position she held in the power. And there was a talk about her getting a hypnotist to Mrs. Liddy because Mrs. Liddy was going to crack. And at the time that Dorothy Hunt, the bag woman for the Watergate, was killed in a plane crash in Chicago, she had in her purse the name of 2 doctors that were psychiatrists and hypnotists. And in the White House tapes, they talked about sending a hypnotist to Mrs. Liddy to control her because she might break down. Now, hypnotism plays a big part in political assassinations, and that isn't the theme of the show today. But there you have Mrs. Liddy praising her husband as being a war hero, and she, in some way, can get on the screen and with a lot of poise, and who knows who reached this woman, because she obviously needed some psychological support, and then she used as a prop. Now, what Liddy said was, he said, if one is engaged in a war, one deploys troops. This is G. Gordon Liddy. One seeks to know the capability and the intention of the enemy. And if one is engaged in politics, one deploys his political troops. Power exists to be used. Watergate was an intelligence gathering operation of one group of persons who were seeking power or to retain power against another group of persons who were seeking to acquire power. That's all it was. He made it very clear that the White House plumbers and the secret armies were set up to ensure the election of Richard Nixon by any means possible. And also, I have to point out that war, when he says it is a war, that one is engaged in war, remember that wars are won and lost by many deaths and murders that the Watergate haven't gone into. Watergate was more than an intelligence gathering operation. He oversimplifies it because kidnapping, anti-war movement people are putting acid into the drinks of various Democratic representatives and blackmailing them with call girls is hardly gathering intelligence operation. But what he says is true. It is one group of persons seeking to acquire power or retaining power, and you use it. And it is a war. It's a war of them versus us, or the people who have power, such as ITT or Rockefeller or the Hughes Corporation or General Motors. They know how to maintain power by keeping their bosses in power. And we'll go into the selection of Gerald Ford has made to investigate the CIA if you want to see how power keeps power. Well, Liddy is very open about what he's doing, and that's why it's important for you to write and deploy your energies to oppose these people. We thought, or a lot of people thought, I didn't, that we had an election in 1972 or 1968. This was not election. This was just a monkey operation, and G. Gordon Liddy knows it, and he doesn't apologize about it. It is to retain certain people in power. It is a war, and anything he does is fair in war. Now, getting back to warfare, there have been many exposures in the last week. I have a whole office or desk just filled with CIA exposures. There's an article from the New York Times of an ex-agent spying on students in New York City. It's dated December 29th, 1974, if you want to get a hold of this. And this agent says, we figured out a way to log up and map the whole world. Now that is for sure. This is what the CIA is doing. They're spreading their domestic operations division into the major cities, and they have a map, and they know how to function. So when the CIA is caught with a domestic operation, anti-war movement, these are the people who are criticizing the power structure, making illegal war in Laos and Cambodia, equivalent to a CIA war in Greece, overthrowing Greece and so forth, or Brazil, instigating these military dictatorships around the world. The CIA is also doing it at home. So what does Gerald Ford do? The Warren Commission, good old Gerald Ford, sets up a blue ribbon commission. Now you'd think that the power structure would be embarrassed by what they're doing, but they've been given total power. They've been the power of appointing Nelson Rockefeller as vice president instead of having an election in 72. So Gerald Ford says, I'll have a blue ribbon commission. And remember, I warned you about this last week on Dialogue Conspiracy, that Henry Kissinger, who's suspect of setting up CIA operations in the United States, suggested to Ford, let's have a blue ribbon commission. And Gerald Ford set up a blue ribbon commission, which to find out if the agency, he says, dabbled in domestic spying. Well, that has to be the understatement of the year. Now, the commission is made up of these older conservatives. Gerald Ford said, personally, he said, he wasn't going to have a member on the commission who had any connection with the CIA. This is what he said. And then General Lemitzer came out and said, of course, as chief of staff, I had connection with the CIA. So the president is saying one thing, pure double talk, and Lemonster is saying I had connection with the CIA. Here's an article from the New York Times on E. Howard Hunt's domestic operations, dated December the 30th. This is the New York Times. Hunt tells of early work for the CIA and domestic unit. Now, this panel is supposed to investigate domestic work in the United States, but Lemonster was in charge of the CIA, or chief of staff, rather, at the time that E. Howard Hunt was planning the Bay of Pigs operation. General Lemonster was behind the Bay of Pigs operation. He wanted the CIA to go back and take over Cuba. E. Howard Hunt was involved in arranging that operation. That was the one that Allen Dulles was removed from the CIA from it. John Kennedy removed him, and then he was put back to the Warren Commission. And General Lemonster not only worked with the CIA and admits he did, but he worked with E. Howard Hunt. And Hunt is supposed to be investigated now. So all of these men, the men that are appointed on this Blue Ribbon Commission, are really identical to the Warren Commission. There's a man, Douglas Dillon, from the New York Investment Bankers, and Mr. Griswold from Harvard Law School. We have Walter Rostow, the head of the National Security Council, and going down, Lyndon Johnson, head of the CIA and National Security Council under Lyndon Johnson, right out of Harvard. You have every one of these people, every one of them, has either been a conduit of funds of the CIA, has been a front for the CIA, is familiar with the CIA, knows what the CIA was doing. There isn't one of them that isn't knowledgeable. Ronald Reagan is supported by the Defense Intelligence Agency. He knows perfectly well who's putting him into power, who pays the bills, who flies him around for his speeches, who he's the front man for. But this is the entrance of Ronald Reagan into a power structure here of the conservative, far right-wing conservative. These people have been moved aside a little bit by Gerald Ford. There's a power structure at the top. This is Reagan's first foot in the door to vie, to sit with Rockefeller up at the top level. He's getting out of California, and Ronald Reagan is moving back east to be on this committee. Watch Reagan's movements very carefully. Now watch for any political assassinations that would make way for Ronald Reagan. I'm very suspicious of the what I call the very extreme right-wing losing hold with Ford and Rockefeller entrenched now, the North and the Eastern Seaboard. It's time for the Southwest assassination team to move in like they did when John Kennedy was in power, Robert Kennedy. Reagan's going back to that commission, and this is his first real toe into the national scene. There's a power struggle at the top of Schlesinger, the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, versus the CIA, and Reagan represents that faction. They're like the tigers striking out against each other in the story of the little black Sambo. They're going to go around and round in circles. I hope they all end in the same way. I have a quotation here that I was going to use for my first book on the John Kennedy assassination. It's based on the Warren Report, and it's called Mischief by Statute. It's from the Psalms 94:21-23, and I think it's appropriate. I hope it ends this way. It says, "Shall the seat of wickedness have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by statute? They gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous, and condemn innocent blood. But the Lord hath been my high tower, and my God the rock of my refuge, and he hath brought upon them their own iniquity, and will cut them off in their own evil. The Lord our God will cut them off." I feel sincerely that there is mischief by statute, that Rockefeller and Reagan, O'Connor, Griswold, these men are not going to represent the purposes for which they are assembled, which is to investigate the illegal domestic operations of the CIA. Now, the justification for the CIA all along was to gather intelligence of foreign dangers to the United States, activity abroad that would harm us in the United States. And the justification for domestic intelligence is the contact of persons inside the United States with foreigners or foreign members of other countries. Now, the CIA was involved in the John Kennedy assassination, and the most blatant agent was Marina Oswald, who came in from the USSR. But the FBI, Agent Hosty, could be with Marina Oswald for 3 visits before Lee Harvey Oswald was murdered, and just 3 weeks before the assassination, under the guise that she is a foreigner and they want to know if the Russian government is using her. So Marina Oswald was working with the FBI, and of course she came in through the conduit of the Greek Orthodox Church. The Sirhan family could be operated, financed, because the CIA justifiably could say they were Palestinians. Again, the conduit of the Greek Orthodox Church. James Ray allegedly shot Martin Luther King. He didn't shoot him, but because he traveled in Canada, in Mexico, a hotbed of CIA funding, and also back to Canada and to England and Portugal with international connections. The minute you leave America, the CIA can have contact with you. So the excuse that the CIA works with these people, they could say they're international and that they want to follow them. But I want to talk a little bit today about the domestic CIA, how the CIA works in the United States. And then I want you to write to Congressman Michael Harrington and to Senator Proxmire and various men in the Congress who will be speaking up. There will be 4 committees in Congress investigating the CIA. And the important thing is bypass that blue ribbon committee. It's just like the Warren Commission, the Executive Order 1130, which was dated November 29, 1963, was to look into the commission to evaluate all the facts and circumstances surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy and the subsequent killings. They didn't do that. They didn't obey. They were to have a thorough investigation. You can say categorically, that's their favorite word, that blue ribbon committee that's set up of military men and bankers and head of a chemical firm and so forth. Harvard Law cannot be objective about CIA working domestically. And we have in California, and I'll stick to our own home base, we have the evidence of the CIA operating domestically in an area involving E. Howard Hunt in the California prison system, in the Department of Corrections, down in Los Angeles, in the Dr. Fielding, the offices, Ellsberg psychiatrist, Daniel Ellsberg psychiatrist. We have the CIA working in California. E. Howard Hunt has admitted in his article the various cities that he's worked in, including San Francisco. The CIA does work domestically, but he worked in Los Angeles. And he has worked, he said he worked with the Cubans. Hunt admitted, this is the article of December the 30th, the New York Times, that he, after 1961 and 62, worked with the Cubans and rounded them up and formed an organization. Well, down in Dr. Fielding's office in Beverly Hills, California, he was working with this Cuban group domestically in the United States with White House supervision, with CIA cameras, with CIA safe houses and disguises and aliases, and we've talked about that. But I have back today with me at KLRB is Elmer Davis, and he's been on another show. He was with me when he first got out of Folsom Prison in October. Elmer and I did a TV show this week, a half-hour TV show, and we're going to be doing a lot of radio shows together because as the CIA story breaks, Elmer can tell you his role of being a patsy, just like Oswald and Sirhan were patsies, and how the CIA works domestically with the police department. Now, this has nothing to do with the anti-war movement, and this is the important thing. The CIA works domestically, and they keep files on people, and they computerize their profiles. But the important thing is they don't just keep files on anti-war protesters. They keep files on almost everybody. They have a data bank to pull out patsies, their past records, and so forth. And Elmer is here because he was named by the Beverly Hills Police Department on the court records of being part of the Dr. Fielding burglary. He didn't do it. How does a person living in Los Angeles get caught in the mesh of the CIA? See, you can talk about their budget, you can talk about when they were formed, you can talk about how many thousand people they bugged, but who are the people out of that $6 billion annual budget? Who is getting hurt? Can you narrow it to people? Well, Elmer is one of those people. So let's rap Elmer about, what we did on the TV show, how the CIA affects you. You never dreamt that you'd be part of their operation or named as a patsy, did you?
Of course not, me. It all came as quite a surprise to me. I never had guessed in the millionaire that I would have been selected because I didn't see any relation that I could possibly have with such endeavor, so to speak.
Well, I don't think that Oswald ever thought, he was killed 2 days after John Kennedy was killed, and he was saying in the jail, I didn't kill anybody. It didn't dawn on him that he had killed President Kennedy. He had a role, but you didn't have a role. The difference between Oswald or Sirhan and Brammer or James Ray is that they received money in government checks or pocket checks from an agent in advance and knew something was going to happen. But you were sitting in Folsom when this story broke. You didn't even get the benefit of money until it happened.
That's true. As a matter of fact, while in Folsom, I was called over the intercom system. They have a way there of calling you by your last name and your prison number. So they were saying Davis B3677 report to the administration office. So I'm thinking in terms of perhaps they left something in my cell in the nature of contraband, had done something that I might have gotten an institutional write-up for, which is called. So when I went to the office, the captain there said some investigators from connected with Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers case, want to see you. This is procedure. You go, they hand you a ducat, and you go to the front office, the administration office. And I told him, I said, are you kidding? You must be kidding. Me, Ellsberg people? He said, no, I'm serious. So, of course, I went, and this was the first indication to me that I actually had been involved, and I was astonished.
Who came first, the FBI?
No, the Ellsberg investigators, they came first, and then the second day, the FBI came. And that was quite experienced, too. They called me in the office and asked me point blank, said, what about this 450 North Bedford Drive caper? That, as I later found out, was the address of Dr. Fielding's office. So I said, I don't know anything about it, 450 North Bedford Drive caper. He said, well, the chief of police, B.L. Clark, said you had confessed in 1971. I said, well, I can't help that. I said, I don't know anything about it. So the shorter one of the two said, well, we're not here to prosecute you anyhow. But he hands me Miranda versus Arizona warning. This is given you when you are suspect in a criminal case. So after reading it, I told him as much. I said, well, it's my understanding of the law that when you're given Miranda warning that you are suspect in a criminal case, yes, you tell me that I'm not being investigated for any crime, I said, well, I don't need to sign this. So the tall one spoke up, well, you're a jailhouse red writer. I said, well, that isn't the point. And I said, I do know my rights. So curiously enough, this is the thing that stands out in my mind. The shorter one, she said, well, we're not here. You don't know what we're here to talk to you about. So to me, the implication was clear. Even at this late date, they were still set on having me to confess to crime that I did not do in order to cover for the White House plumbers' involvement in the break-in.
And they had admitted. What date did Hunt and Liddy admit that they did the break-in? What time period was that where they actually said, we did it? They came to you.
They came to me, this was in May.
And when did they admit it? When did they admit that they actually did it?
I think it was admitted a day or so for maybe in that week, but it wasn't publicized. They still had hopes that I would, or someone would plead guilty to it, and then they still could cover it. Yeah. This was before the information was even turned over to Matt Burns, I think, the judge in the case.
And it took a year to get out of Folsom. This is 3 years on a compilation of charges that the White House admitted they did.
That's true.
So you see, the problem, and one of the things that was interesting, is that Elmer was in Beverly Hills and was picked up, and the police department asked him to clear the books of 35 burglaries. Didn't you? You said you thought something was fishy then. They wanted to put a lot of pressure on you, or begged you to do this for them, right?
Even in 1971, I will believe the rest of my life that if someone had listened, that some of this could have been forestalled. In 1971, Beverly Hills Police, in relation to another offense, had tried to get me to confess to 35 different crimes to clean up their book, so to speak. And because of their persistence in the method by which they were going about it, I suspected then that it was something
big.
It was something unusual. And I wrote to the Free Press, I wrote to the Police Commission, and the captain there, and everyone told them that how I was being framed and so forth.
Did you save copies of letters that get lost among your possessions?
The ones I had were lost, but the paper later picked it up. The Ellsberg people, the investigators, they discovered...
Letters to the Police Commission? Would they still have on file?
Yes.
That you wrote... this is where the radical or the liberal press wouldn't help Elmer anywhere in the Los Angeles Times. He knew about the Los Angeles Free Press and called and said, look, I'm being sent to jail on something that's a flagrant abuse of my rights, and... I didn't do, these burglaries, and they just gave him a big number of burglaries and sent him off to jail anyway. But the important thing is that at the time that they were putting the pressure, this was October of 71, and the entry was in September, and a few weeks after, the White House plumbers and Cubans had been operating inside the United States with CIA identification and cameras and so forth. Just a few weeks after they did that entry, then Beverly Hills Police wanted to clear the whole books. And it was Louis Tackwood of the Los Angeles Police Department who said that he was working with E. Howard Hunt, that Howard Hunt works in the United States with the CIA. And it's important that people recognize that the United States does have the CIA working in the police department. Now, they're supposed to be advisors, but they're not. They're actually working with the police department. And the problem is that the government is going to investigate the anti-war movement or the files on the anti-war movement, and they're going to try to focus it. What they do when they take an investigation, like this Blue Ribbon Committee, is that they don't go to the whole broad problem. When the Watergate Senate Select Committee was closed up, when it was covered up, Senator Howard Baker said, we've seen the tip of the iceberg. This thing, Elmer, getting back to the Beverly Hills Police Department, the big problem is, one of the big problems that I listed, there's four things, is when we talk about crime on the streets, we were going over that thing about the LEAA and the total police state that they're planning. The Beverly Hills Police Department can't solve their burglaries if they have 35 and they're unsolved, and they ask you to clear one, and that's the White House plumbers. What happens to the other 34? Those burglars are still out on the streets, and or either one master burglar has robbed 34 places, and the police obviously are covering for him, or 35 individual burglars are out on the streets, and the Beverly Hills people are not protected anymore. And I feel that the crime in the streets, these statistics are allowed to happen so that they could come in later with more police and more statistics and more studies. I just picked up today from some people pamphlets of the studies and the subjects and the money being poured into California to solve crime, just like a huge amount that runs into millions and then into $1 billion to solve crime, a subject that we're going to talk about on other shows called SAFER, which was Ronald Reagan's baby for California. Well, in Beverly Hills, for example, those problems aren't solved. Then you have the prison ripoff, where they want to build these huge mammoth prisons and add more guards and more prisons, and some of the people locked up in there, like yourself, are housed for 3 years when you didn't do the burglary.
That's true.
Then the court expenses. Then you have the housing, like maintaining. If you're on a minimum budget and out on the streets, it couldn't be any worse. all your rights are stripped and you're a number and you're in prison for 3 years and the taxpayer is paying your room and board. They could send you to college for the same price, where you could be of some use to society or continue going to law school for the tuition for the price of keeping you at Folsom. So they lock you up for something you didn't do, and they're paying out their tax dollars to maintain you. At the same time, you're being dehumanized, where you could be learning a law trade to help other people with those skills.
Another interesting point to show you how the judicial system, the courts itself, are involved in this type of conspiratorial work is indicated by the fact I filed writ of habeas corpus in the 3rd Appellate District Court in Sacramento, challenging the legality of my conviction. And this was in July of '73, and what is called a show cause order was issued, which indicates that I had merits. And an attorney was appointed, and papers were filed, and it was submitted for a hearing for opinion sometime in October of 1973. And this is January of 1975, and no decision has been written yet. And
You've been out 3 months, and they still haven't answered that you were falsely imprisoned since '73.
And I contacted the attorney who was appointed to the case in Sacramento, Paul W. Grunwald, and he himself, which is not common for a fine attorney to make this statement, he himself, who was bound by a code of ethics, and Kane makes a statement against the bench and bar, said this is the first time in experience that he's seen a case held up. So he said maybe shelf, so to speak. Maybe they just want me to disappear.
Well, after October '73, you found out in the May of '73 that the public now knew that you were falsely imprisoned. So for them to admit it in October '73, when you filed that, they're just going to ignore it, let you out, and forget the whole thing. They just didn't answer you.
That's true. They let me out on parole, and then they also aware of the fact that I have this $2 million suit pending in the federal courts against the White House plumbers and the Beverly Hills
Isn't that the civil court?
Civil court,
yeah,
yes.
Because Nixon is off the federal rap.
Yes, against former President Nixon and Ehrlichman and all of the plumbers and the Beverly Hills Police Department. So they perhaps know that if they take any action on the criminal case, it would have some...
It would prove...
positive bearing on the civil case. So this is one of the reasons.
But the case is pretty cut and dry at one level, but the courts are just sitting on it. They won't admit that you were falsely imprisoned.
Of course not.
Because then it would support your lawsuit against them.
And this happened all too often.
Is there a time limit on when they can answer you?
Well, apparently it is, and they're supposed to be with reasonable haste, but as in other areas, they construe it as they see fit.
Yeah, I'm doing an article in the Realist. The next article I'm doing in the Realist is on Elmer Davis and his case, and it's on the 3 black men at Watergate, and focusing mostly on Elmer Davis. But there was just an article about a week ago in the newspaper. The gentleman Frank Wills, who discovered the tape at the Watergate Hotel, has had nothing but trouble in 2.5 years getting a job as a security guard. And he feels that it's because he caught these people and it brought down the president, that nobody will hire him. You have to be fairly wealthy or establishment to have something to guard or secure, whether it's jewels or papers. And that side of the fence will have no use for him, because even though he didn't know what it was going to net or bring in, he caught burglars. It just happened to be these people, and because of that, he can't earn his livelihood, and he's been trained as a guard. And then the other man is Lewis Tackwood, who, again, I've talked about him on many, many shows. Lewis Tackwood wrote the book The Glass House Tapes by Avon Press. You can get it, order it at your bookstores, wherever they have paperback books, or the Thunderbird bookstore in town in Carmel here. And Tackwood talked about an espionage system, and he referred in 1971, the same time that he was having press conferences and telling people about the relationship of the White House and the CIA to the local police departments, was the same time that Elmer was being made the scapegoat and being forced backed against the wall to confess, and when he didn't, he was sent to jail. Now, the motive for the espionage squad, according to Lewis Tackwood, in those days was patriotism, that men were acting on orders. That was patriotism. And this is what G. Gordon Liddy says. It's patriotism. There's a war, and we do these things. If they need someone to clean the books, they'll say Elmer Davis. They take out of the jackets of the Los Angeles Police Department former arrests that were on Elmer's record, and then they say, well, if he did this many, the jury will believe the police chief of Beverly Hills, which they did, and not Elmer Davis. Therefore, he's sent to prison, and G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt were enjoying their family and their relationships working for the White House and close to Richard Nixon, and somebody else was named as a patsy and sent off in their place. Tackwood warned about the links, again, of the White House and the CIA to the local police department, and warned about a national police state, and mentioned the police departments being geared into the Los Angeles Police Department. Now the question is, if the White House and the National Security Council are part of the domestic operations of the CIA, how is it going to be possible for what we're told is a blue ribbon commission to investigate this situation? It's impossible. Their decisions will have to be made ahead of time. They've already probably selected a handful of people that will be moved out of office. 3 men have left. Richard Helms was brought home. I'm sure if Richard Nixon can be removed from the White House, Richard Helms will get a slap on the wrist and be taken away from his position in Iran. And there'll be 4 or 5 people, Mr. Angleton, that will leave. They'll get other jobs with the Pentagon, not with the CIA, or they'll retire. The men who did get out since the CIA exposure, 3 of them got a 7% raise if they retired before January. But the investigation of the Blue Ribbon Commission reminds me of the Warren Commission, the way it opened. The hearings were supposed to have subpoenas. They were supposed to get all evidence relating to matters under investigation. Fifth Amendment would not be granted. It was granted to somebody involved in the murder down in Dallas, Texas. Immunity wasn't supposed to be granted any witnesses. They just didn't call in the right witnesses. There's no way that this Blue Ribbon Commission can do anything adequate, but there are loopholes that Congress is going into these matters, and some days I add the minuses, we're going backwards, and some days I add the pluses and we're going forward. I remember the NBC News account when John Kennedy was murdered. It was Sunday night. 2 days later, and Lee Harvey Oswald was killed. It was 10:38. Frank McGee was saying on NBC, the Dallas police force has just declared the Oswald case closed. And Henry Wade said a number of witnesses saw someone with a gun in the window. The fingerprints, Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints were on a rifle found at the bookstore. Paraffin test showed he fired a shot. Our office has not closed the investigation as there is no concrete evidence, but there's no doubt in our minds that Oswald was the assassin. Now later it turned out that the paraffin tests were negative on Oswald. There were no fingerprints of his on a rifle, but there was no doubt in their minds that Oswald was the assassin. Now the Warren Commission and the Dallas police had their minds made up, and this Blue Ribbon Commission can do nothing but say that in the interest of national security, with a war going on in Southeast Asia, they overstepped their bounds, and that they would watch it from now on, which is not true. The CIA has to be watched, and as getting back to what Liddy said, it is a war. Elmer Davis can tell you it's a war. He spent time. You agree that there's a warfare going on against the people.
Indeed, I do. I've been one of the victims.
You've been the victim, so that it isn't just the anti-war movement, that they picked out of a file things that you had done and said, well, he makes a good patsy. So it isn't a question of the anti-war movement. It's a question of the CIA operating with the police departments. So get busy and write letters to members that are doing the congressional investigations. And I wish there was a protest against this Blue Ribbon Commission, but I hope people are smarter now and bypass it. Well, our time is up now for Dialogue Conspiracy, and we'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves, and we'll be back next Monday.
This has been Dialogue Conspiracy with political research specialist Mae Brussell, who for 10 years has been researching the facts behind political assassinations and conspiracies in this country. Dialogue Conspiracy originates with KLRB-FM in
We have to
Carmel,
do 10 more
California.
minutes over live.
No, how come it stopped?
Hey, Mom.
Don't ask me. I'm so fucking mad. Did it stop in that room?
You're in L.A., ain't you?
Oh, I'm so mad. This stopped 10 minutes short. We'll either have to do it over or take it from this to that. I get so mad. One day this stopped and I had to do the whole thing over. And you do the whole thing. See, I'm on the air and I forgot, so I can't stop. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Good.
Getting ready to